works in general for school, right? So I mean, first of all, I'll get to publication. I'll get to how to publish a paper, but now we are talking school. So there are differences. Now in school, you want a good paper, but you can be a bit more relaxed because what we care about is really what I care about is I want to see two things. So I want to see first that you understood the topic, and there are ways to show that, you know, and I want to see that you have something to say about that topic, which looks like yours, you know, you thought about it, and you know, there is no right and wrong in philosophy. There is only well argued for or not well argued for. Okay, in philosophy you can believe any crazy thing. So you can believe there is no external world, for example, or you can even believe that you don't exist. Um, there is such a paper published. Okay, so school papers. Well, so here are a few strategies of what you can do. The easiest, most straightforward strategy is to simply, so one limitation, one constraint that I give is for you to write about a topic that we've been covering in the syllabus, right? And I know there are a lot of topics that are interesting, nice, beautiful, but they are not in the syllabus. I mean, the whole idea of the course is that we focus on the syllabus, right? And I'm the kind of boss. I decided what's in the syllabus. Okay, so let's talk about that. This is important because actually it happened to me when I was a student. I took a philosophy of language course, and I talked about, you know, one of our texts in our syllabus is going to be The Brain in a Vat idea by Hilary Putnam, and um, I wrote a paper about the brain in a vat, but the paper was about the epistemological issues, about knowledge. But this was philosophy of language course. And it was a good, well-written paper. So the teacher was really in a dilemma. It was a well-written paper, but on a different subject than the subject of the course. She thought either I fail him completely, that doesn't sound good, or maybe I give him A because the paper was very good. That's also not fair because it's not on the topic of the course. So I got a B plus. Okay, a B plus for a paper that I worked a lot on, and it was a lot of effort into it, thinking and so on. So it was not a good deal in the end. It would have been better if I just focus on what the topic is and so on. Something similar happened to me also second year, I guess. I wrote about something that was not in the syllabus, but it was very interesting, and the teacher didn't include it in the syllabus, right? And the teacher was nice. I got, I think, an A minus because because the teacher said that okay, it's not in the syllabus, but you know, it's interesting, put a lot of work. But it was not the right thing for me to do. I should have focused on. So we have certain topics in the syllabus. I mean, the first half is what we are still doing. I think this week might be the last one, I guess, maybe on this topic. Oh no, next week is the last one on this topic. So this is the topic that you will be fed up with, but you will know everything about it. So I turned you into experts in this area. So after next week we move to some other topics. So basically you can easily find some something to pick from these and discuss. So here are some strategies. So the simplest, easiest, most straightforward thing to do with a paper is to pick one text from the syllabus and criticize it. Okay, this is the lazy people. Well, you know, lazy. It's not so lazy. It's lazy in terms of you don't think about how to write the paper. You just say, okay, I don't agree with this paper by Bolog or this paper by Braden Mitchell, whatever, and I'm going to criticize this paper. So what you do here, yeah, Burju has a question.
I don't want to expose my topic, but can I pick like a general topic that we went over on multiple weeks and over multiple papers? And can I write something on that?
Yeah.
Because during the semester, there were multiple papers that really got to me. Like, I really liked them. I really enjoyed them.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
sure. I'll come back actually to topics as well in a bit. So, okay, the simplest is get the paper. How do you criticize the paper? Again, you need two things. One thing I need to see is you understood the issues of the paper, okay? And there's a kind of part, the exposition part. You present the arguments. Now, one smart thing that you can do here, I mean, I know the paper, people know the paper, right? So try not to just repeat what's in the paper. Try to offer your own way of synthesizing what's in the paper. So I have some experience because I've been in the field for a long time. I can synthesize a paper very nicely in one page, any paper. Okay, I don't need to get to all the details and so on. So you can already be creative there. You can say, okay, here is what he says basically in a nutshell, and maybe sometimes you can even formulate it better than the author because you get the essence. And maybe the author is kind of, sorry about the term, bullshitting a lot, but you just say, here is what he really says. Here is the essence, and this is what I'm going to attack. So that's very nice if you can do that, or extract an argument in premise and conclusion form. You say, okay, here is basically what Nagel says, okay, or here's how I interpret what he says. So that's part one. I want to see how you understood the issues, and part two is your criticism of that. Now, of course, a kind of textbook, the textbook logic or critical thinking course uh, is going to tell you that, there are two ways in which you could criticize. I mean, once you formulated the argument of the text, okay, there are two ways. So one way is to attack the validity of the argument, which means you attack whether the conclusion really follows from what the author assumes, or you attack the soundness of the argument, which means you agree that it goes through, but you attack one or more premises, right? So you say, okay, David Lewis, this is his argument for identity theory. He wants to deduce identity theory from functionalism. I think the argument works in terms of validity. The conclusion follows, but I don't like premise one. Okay, and now you put forward your criticism against premise one. Okay, or in more rare occasions, you can find ways in which an argument is not valid. I mean, if you can reinterpret a premise in more than one way, then sometimes under some interpretations the conclusion doesn't follow. So you can say, well, it doesn't follow under this interpretation. Okay. Or, you have examples when you have the same word used in one premise, premise one, premise two, the same word, but actually you can argue that it's used in different senses. So therefore the argument doesn't really go through. You remember the knowledge argument, where basically the Nemiro-Lewis type of attack on that was to say that knowledge, Mary knows everything physical, then Mary comes to know something new, therefore physicalism is false, and they argued, well, the word know has different meaning in premise 1 and in premise 2, right? So therefore the argument is not really valid. In premise 1, knows is used in the sense, not in the sense of propositional knowledge, but in the sense of knowledge how. Okay, so this is an example. So to get back, so this is the first strategy. Basically, you try to destroy that paper. Okay, you try to destroy that paper and attack that paper in various ways. You can include a lot of other things that you already know. You can include other papers that you read. You can offer alternative ways of, whatever the author claims, whatever premise the author assumes, and so on. So this is strategy one. Strategy two is, so strategy one, I would call it analytical, okay? Because you analyze something small. And also, let me just get back a bit. So I mean, it also depends on the paper. So if I did this, I would choose a paper where I have really just one argument, okay? I wouldn't choose a very long paper that is basically like, Chalmers's paper, the Consciousness and its Place in Nature, which we discussed. That's not a very good paper to criticize because it's a paper that tells you all the views, right? It's a kind of map of the scene, of the logical space. So the best papers for this are papers that are really have one argument as the central argument, and then you can attack that. So I guess the early identity theory papers, those are good. They are also short. One of them at least is shorter. The Bollock paper is good. That zombie thought experiment, you can attack it and so on. So you need the appropriate paper to do this kind of thing. Don't choose something very Hegelian and big and synthetic. So this brings me to strategy number 2, which is the synthetic. The first one was analytical, and the second one is synthesis, right? Synthesis is the opposite of analysis. And in analysis, you take things apart, right? And you gain knowledge by knowing the internal structure of something. By synthesis, you put things together. You get the big picture. Both of them are valuable knowledge. I know that most analytic philosophers they don't like synthesis. Okay, they think it's BS and whatever. I love synthesis. I'm the kind of person who can enjoy both kinds of papers. Synthesis means that you see from the multitude of many little things, you put together one big picture. And that's useful because somehow, again, it tells you the essence of the issue. So the mind-body problem is such an issue. It's a big, simple-seeming problem, but actually, given how many views you can have, Chalmers's paper is a good example of synthesis, the consciousness and its place in nature. That's what he does. He tells you, here is the structure of how you can argue, and here are all the possible views. Now, I don't agree those are all the possible views. There might be others, but you can do something like that. I mean, if you do that, for example, for mind-body, yeah, don't copy Chalmers, okay? That's obvious, okay? So you could do an alternative, for example. You could say, well, look, Chalmers has neglected some issues, and maybe there are not 6 views, but 8 views, or 9 views, or 15 views, okay? Or maybe just 3 views, okay? Maybe some of the views he talks about can be grouped into just one. So synthesis is also interesting and nice. It requires a bit more work from you in terms of reading. I think the bibliography is going to be longer. The analytical type style of paper can have just, at least one it should have, but it will have typically 3 or 4, let's say, items in the bibliography. But a synthesis type of paper, you show in that you want to show that I really read everything about this topic. I'm an encyclopedia, okay? And here is the big picture after I studied all of that. So it's a bit more difficult because you didn't really have time to read that much. You read probably 15 papers so far. So when you read 50, 60, 80 papers, then you say, okay, I read everything about this topic and here is the synthesis. But you can do it. It's possible. It's doable. Okay, the third type of paper is a bit riskier. So the first ones are pretty standard. People do this, students do this, and they are successful. The third one is a bit riskier. This is a kind of here is my theory. Okay. Now with here is my theory type of paper, there are certain things you want to avoid. So you don't want to write in the void as if no one exists in the world, only you. Okay. And I already have this with publications as well as advice. One of my points here is, engage with others who wrote about the topic. So it's very tempting to say, my God, I'm so smart and I have a theory. Here is my theory. People don't like that. If you try to publish paper like that, you will never succeed. People want to see you engage with other people who wrote. And you are not definitely the first one to write about this. I'm not saying you should deal with anyone, but there must be a few people, even if you have a totally original theory, there must be a few people who were either wrong for the right reason, which connects to your paper, or they were right, but they didn't quite get it exactly the way you wanted, right? So engage with others. The second advice, which is also one of my publication advices, is, and this is again difficult, when you are a student, you are very excited, and I was like that as well. I wrote here, do not play the lone genius philosopher, at least not now. Okay, you know, it's very tempting to say that, oh my God, the whole field is made up of idiots, but here I am, I have this great, I see the world differently than other people. Even if this is true, it is a losing strategy, right? It's a losing strategy. I get to reject papers like this when I'm refereeing. Like every year, I get one or two. They go in the garbage bin directly. When I see that kind of arrogance, and here is how the whole philosophy was wrong, and here I am, uh, Murat, who, it might be true, you might be a genius, but this is not the place. And as a matter of fact, even the geniuses, we made them geniuses. Most of them were not that much praised during their lives. They became geniuses 200 years after they died. So you will not benefit from that that kind of thing. So the risky part is really that So here is one thing that I don't care about, and that you are wrong, as it were. Okay, all I care about is the way you argue for things, right? So you could have the crazy. I mean, there are crazy people, panpsychists. I never understand these people, but there are a lot of them. They think it's, I think I don't really. I'm not attracted to that, but they have quite good arguments, okay, why panpsychism, in what way it's good. So let's suppose you have a theory of your own about, I don't know, the mind-body connection, or about intentionality, or about semantics, or about, artificial intelligence, or whatever. There are two things. So one thing is, it should make sense as part of a larger map of possible views. So you should kind of, integrate it. You say, oh, here is what I think, it's a new theory, and here is how it's different from others and how it's similar to some others, right? You place your theory in a context of, in a map of possible theories in logical space. The second thing is you argue for your theory. Now, I think the nicest way to argue is this kind of very, mercantile, monetary way, cost and benefits. This is what we do in philosophy. People think that we are doing this like, oh, this is such a deep idea. I mean, sometimes there are such deep ideas that you don't care to analyze. You just have the intuition. My God, this is so deep. But usually, cost and benefit. Why should I believe this theory? Here are some benefits. It's better than such and such theory, because it doesn't require me to believe some crazy things, right? The cost, well, I have to swallow this, which is a crazy thing to swallow, crazy belief. But overall, if I put everything in balance, it is a good theory. It is preferable to other theories. So now, okay, you can do this strategy, you can do this, can write this type of paper. The problem is, I think that you don't have so much time. I think you are able to write a good paper of this kind when you've been studying for years, and it's really, everything comes very naturally to you. You have all the theories in your head, you see them, you can play with them. But even people who are experienced with this, even they take notes, for example. Okay, taking notes is so good and so difficult. I mean, I'm so lazy to take notes, but I realize whenever I take notes, everything is so much easier, so much quicker, smoother, everything. So I encourage you to take notes, I mean, for yourself. I mean, before you write the paper. If you write this kind of paper, what is my theory? The first thing you need to know is whether you really understand your own theory. Okay, is it something clear in your head what your theory is, right? Then the second thing is basically, how does it differ and how is it similar to others? The third thing is, why should I believe it? Tell me some good reasons why it's better than other theories. So these are three strategies of arguing. They are not pure, I'm not asking you, you do this or that. I mean, you can combine elements of each, right? So you could write criticism of a particular paper, but in which you also offer some, some new way of synthesizing, whatever we know about the subject. Or you can do a synthesis paper in which one of the sections is maybe a very, very directed, very focused attack on a very particular argument or premise or something like that. So I'm just trying to help you to see that you do have tools with which to write, with which to work, conceptual tools and strategies of, um, tackling a certain philosophical problem. So, going back, after I finish, I will ask you to ask me questions, so don't worry about it. We have enough time. Um, so, because I already mentioned two of the things that are also true for publishing a paper, which was, engage with others and do not play the lone genius, at least not now. So let me mention a couple more things, and the following is basically very specific to publishing. So, and I think it's very important. Um, so check your paper for any sign of weakness in expression. So you write in English typically, and when I say any, I mean you should not have even one. Okay, I'm that serious about it. If you have one mistake, which could be an English mistake, or it could be, even if it's not a mistake, it could be an infelicitous way of expressing yourself, which would indicate to the anonymous reviewer that maybe you are not a native speaker. And unfortunately, I'm not saying this is okay, but this is how it works. I mean, you want to hide your identity. I want to hide my identity as much as possible, Um, and I think that's the way for me to move forward and be successful. So if I have, I have friends, American friends and British friends, and I'm asking them to have a look, which is I'm not asking them to correct because I write correctly everything, but what I'm asking them is like look at something that would tell you that this is not a native speaker. Using a term that a native speaker wouldn't speak like that. It's correct grammatically, it's everything okay, but someone said no, this guy is whatever. And that is good for this kind of implicit bias that people have, referees have. Now moving to a bit more serious issues is like, yeah, really check for perfect. You should have the perfect expression of your ideas in English, and it's not about English anymore, but about trying to, not to have too complicated and long sentences that you can't really figure out. Try to have exactly the right length, the right clarity, and things like that. And why this is important, I think it's like, it's like a boxing match. It's enough in the boxing match if you just leave the guard down just for half a second. That's enough to be kicked out, okay? You should think that way. That's why I'm saying any. Your paper should be perfect. Like, I submitted a paper not long ago. I think I read it 15 times. I think 15 times I read it before. And it's not short, it's 9,000 words. And after a while, I didn't find anything anymore that would dissatisfy me, that would tell me, okay, I need to change this. But it was, and I'm not asking you to do this for this course. I mean, I'm very relaxed. But for you in the future, okay, the paper should look in such a way that the referee can focus on the argument and the essence of the paper and is not bothered by anything that you say there. Okay, so, and you know why I'm saying this? Actually, I see a lot of this in our students who write, master's thesis, uh, very good master's thesis, and then on page 16, there is that sentence, you know, which, to me, for a master's thesis, I'm not gonna penalize you for that. I'm gonna say, yeah, it's perfect master's thesis. But when you send that for publication, that sentence on page 16, which is not well written, is gonna bother, at least implicitly, the referee, and his sympathy is gonna go down. It's not right. What? This is not right. I mean, the referee should accept your paper if it's good. But unfortunately, it's a horrible competition in publication. I mean, you should be aware that you will be mostly unsuccessful. I mean, your rejection rate is that much and your success rate is that much. I just got rejected yesterday, a very good paper, I think. One of the best papers I wrote. And I resubmitted it immediately to another journal. So this is another advice for publication. Don't get depressed because of rejection. Just keep sending your papers, okay? One of the best publishers that I've ever known was our former colleague, uh, uh, David Kovac, who's publishing like super fancy places and a lot of papers, like very top journals. And he told me like he even had a paper that was rejected 6 or 7 times and then accepted in the 8th journal. Okay, so I said, okay, so no one should worry about rejection. Okay, you get rejected, don't worry, move on. If you think you need to revise something, revise it, send it to the next journal. Related to this, of course, if you trust your paper very much, don't go for, don't lower your expectations. Send it to the best journal, the top of the tops, and be patient. Don't be, it gets rejected, okay, you send it to the next one. Don't start with the low quality, and there are also some journals that you should never send a paper there because it's actually something negative in your CV. You want in your CV as much as possible the top of the top. Okay. So the last one, I guess, or maybe the last two, then I will ask you to ask me questions. So these are very useful strategies regarding the content of the paper. Or the weaknesses of your argument. Do not try to avoid somehow, confuse the reader. If there is a weakness in your paper, just say it, like, look, my paper is not perfect. I'm aware that I can't solve this problem, and try to find a way of explaining why that is not such a big problem. Okay, so don't try to hide if you have something, some weakness there. Okay, what's the right? I don't know if it's the right expression. A skeleton in the closet. Maybe it's not the best expression in this context, but basically, I would say, expose your skeletons. Take them out of the closet. Okay, because skeleton in the closet is something really bad. I mean, the skeleton is not easy. These are simply weaknesses of your paper. You say, well, look, I'm aware that my paper cannot solve that problem or whatever. But anyway, no paper can solve that problem. That's always a good excuse. Or, well, that problem, if you solve that problem, some other problem wouldn't have arisen, but my paper solves that problem. So there are ways of basically, using excuses, as it were, instead of, because if you try to hide it, what happens? The referee is going to find what you're trying to hide and is going to reject your paper unfairly. Instead of saying, oh, you should revise the paper and address this issue, he will say, oh, the paper is bad because it does not solve that problem. To prevent that from happening, you already say, yes, I cannot solve that problem, but it's not really such a big problem, or no one else can solve that problem. And the last one is, I just gave this advice to one of my students that I supervise nowadays, because she was concerned about, she's trying to build up some new theory, and she was concerned that she gets things that don't work. So certain attempts, and she says, oh my God, I don't know, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. So one nice thing to do is, I wrote here, discard the bad theories in a visible way. So don't, so mention them in your paper. If you have a theory which doesn't work, write it in the paper and say, here is a theory that doesn't work. That adds words to your paper, but also it's also useful because the reader, that's what Plato does in all the dialogues. He rejects a lot of theories, and that's the value of Plato. The value of Plato is not that he finds the final definition. He never finds the last word on the issue. He just says, well, look, here is what people think, this is wrong, explains each of them, And that's very useful because we know what the wrong theories are. And you can do that. Put your garbage out, okay, in the field and burn it in front of people. I know burning garbage is not environment friendly, but metaphorically, don't hide your garbage somewhere that no one sees it. Get your garbage out in the paper and say, look, what a garbage. Let's burn it. Look, another piece of garbage. Let's burn it. In the end, you will say, oh, and by the way, here is my thing, which is so much nicer. It's not garbage. Here it is, right? So it's very useful, and the referee is gonna say, wow, what a thorough thinker, has considered all these things and rejected them rather than just going for something and say, oh, here is how smart I am, right? So this is roughly, some advice. I guess there's countless more advice that I could give, but this is what occurred to me uh, this morning, basically, which kind of relates to some interactions that I had with students recently, with my students.